What if you could turn your passion for helping others into a career that changes lives, starting with your own? Join Empower's Certified Professional Empower Coach Academy, accredited by the ICF and powered by Oregon State University. Our next cohort begins February 28th. Visit yesempower.com to reserve your spot today.
Welcome to Rewired. I'm your host, Tiffany Grimes with Empower Coaching and Training. Today, I'm interviewing Theo Morrison, a professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation, a certified whole person coach, a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, and an internal family systems level 2 graduate. With 15 years of experience mentoring individuals in recovery from alcoholism, Theo brings deep presence and practical wisdom to his work. He supports people of all ages, backgrounds through coaching, teaching, and mentorship. Additionally, Theo has spent over 20 years as a professional photographer, traveling extensively and collaborating with a wide range of individuals and businesses. Theo, thank you so much for joining us today. And you're coming from Portland, Oregon, yes? How is fall in Portland, Oregon?
Fall is really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's been very lovely. There's a little chill in the air. We could see our breaths this morning walking the kids to school. All the colors are starting to come out. And for now, at least, it's sunny. So
Yeah. Oh,
gratitude for that.
so great. We're on the monarch pathway, and I had 94 monarch caterpillars appear in my garden in a in a matter of, I think, 3 to 5 days. And so now we are hatching them. So that's my in and out of the day as I'm running out, trying to tell these caterpillars, like, you got to hurry. You got some miles to cover. You got to go. It's getting cold. But we do have the afternoon sunshine right now, too, where I'm at.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that you counted 94.
Yeah. So many. Yeah, we have a chart. We keep it. Pretty
cool.
Exciting. Well, we are here today, Theo, because you and I have the honor of being able to work together through Empower and the work that you're doing and teaching and facilitating some of our workshops. And so I've just been able to witness from the sidelines your love and passion and expertise through the lens of mindfulness. Of course, especially as a coach, a professional PCC level coach as well. But I asked you here just because I wanted to get your perspective. I share and teach a lot from the mindfulness platform and love your perspective. I know I've shared this with you before. And for our listeners, Theo will cover the mindfulness broadcast for me sometimes when I'm not available. And I always hear back from folks who attend those who say, well, I just think about what Theo said, and this. I use that phrase all the time, or I really loved how Theo, phrased this or used this metaphor. And so I know the way that you bring mindfulness to the world is very digestible, and I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to learn from you and hear from you today.
Oh, that's great.
My first question is really, it starts small and then it goes big. So you can answer this in whatever layering you'd like to. But I talk a lot about the neuroscience of mindfulness. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that. So what's actually happening in the brain when someone is consistently practicing mindfulness? And then we can go a little bit bigger because, beyond that, beyond just the neuroscience is this like mystery of consciousness, of being alive, of how to touch into that layer as a way to create this, deeper sense of motivation in our daily practice and how we stay connected to our practice, and the why behind it, I think. So love to hear from you.
Yeah. From the micro to the macro.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a really helpful way to think about things. So thanks for setting the stage. Yeah, as far as the the neuroscience behind all of it. I think my favorite is something I was listening to recently or reading about recently, where there was a very dedicated practitioner of mindfulness, someone who spends maybe 3 hours a day, let's say, in practice, in a dedicated practice, and then probably goes out for, very long-term retreats on a periodic basis in whatever way he's able, right? So maybe he goes on a 90-day retreat where he's just in silence practicing. So these are the extreme ends.
Yeah.
So he went into a brain scanner and kind of blew away the scientists, because there's something called the default mode network that a lot of brain scientists refer to when they're studying mindfulness. And I don't remember actually the particular regions of the brain. I wish I had the type of brain myself. I could be like, this cingulate and the cortex but unfortunately, I speak in broad strokes. But essentially, the default mode network, one of my teachers, Tara Brock, talks about this verb, selfing. Oh, I'm selfing, right? And that's essentially what the default mode network is. It's really when we are having self-referential conversations with ourselves. I'm talking to myself about myself. I'm talking to myself about myself. I'm talking to myself about myself, right? Some people call this neurosis. And it turns out that the default mode network is highly correlated with things like anxiety and depression and lower levels of contentment in one's life. And it turns out that mindfulness leads to less and less activity in this region of the brain, right? And so this extreme case of this person who's been meditating for 3 hours a day and sometimes more for, let's say, 20 years or whatever, and literally has no register of those areas of the brain being online when they put them in the brain scanner, right? So what we can say from that is that it is possible. Like, there's no actual upper limit on the amount of freedom that we can attain aside from our life circumstances. I guess I would just say that. Like, most of us have certain responsibilities that disallow us from meditating for 3 hours a day, or for taking off for 3 months and sitting in a cave with a bunch of monks. Like, that's not on the menu for a lot of us. And it also speaks to this idea that this is an evidence-based practice that we can engage to slowly over time decrease the amount of activity in that part of our brain, and therefore reap the benefits of higher levels of resiliency, less anxiety, less depression, less neurosis, more contentment. All of those things are available. So that's kind of my favorite kind of way to approach the neuroscience for people that are kind of, sure, I've heard of it, but why? The trust but verify, right? Which I totally relate to.
So good. I mean, and I was just, last week's podcast was about awe, and we talked about that, the default network, and how even awe, the practice of awe, reduces the busyness in that mode. And I think about kind of taking us now from the micro to the macro, what other things that are happening in that network are comparison, putting people into groups, right? And like, so these are my people and these are not my people. These are safe people. These are not safe people. And so it's easy then now to go to that macro level and say, well, how does that impact our life, our society, where we're seeing that us and them and the comparisons, good and bad, yes and no, red and blue, right and wrong, whatever it is, it's like, that's all generating in those areas, and how this practice could really globally have an impact.
Yeah. No, and it does globally have an impact, right? And I love that you were mentioning awe, and I think that's such an amazing practice to have, right? Like, mindfulness is a skill that we get to practice and improve. Having awe as a part of our life is another, you can think of it as a skill that you practice. Like, oh, what if I just look at the sky for a minute? Like, that's a practice of awe. And I loved hearing your story about that trip that you took with your friends. Like, oh my God, that sounds so juicy.
Yeah. And Utah must have a higher awe rate.
No, I think they rate really high on the awe factor, on the awe scale. And the thing that I hear from teachers who I really respect and who I've learned from is that the longer we practice, the more we're able to find awe in a bowl of soup, or we were able to find awe in the way that a dewdrop happens to be, lingering on a leaf before it falls to the ground, or, these types of moments where more and more, and I can speak for myself, that more and more as I've gone along in my practice, I find myself getting like really floored by things that are kind of mundane. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, that's so great. So it's not to say that we shouldn't, and I do myself really like, stand at the edge of the ocean and just kind of wonder like, what is going on, and be in that awe space. And I can kind of use that and as a mindfulness practice to then bring it over to other aspects of my life that maybe I take for granted, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You saying that made me think about a conversation I was having with my neighbor the other day. And it went from just, he has to bring an RV through our tree section and he needed to trim back a few of our trees. And it went from like, got to put oil into my tree pole to quickly, like, we are made of stardust and all of this, like just,
yeah.
It is so full of awe when we train our brain to look for it. And I think that's so much of what you do is reminding us that this is all learnable at any age. And imagine being young and learning how to do this and how that massively changes the trajectory of one's life, I would imagine.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's changed the trajectory of my life deeply.
Yeah.
So,
Tell me more about that. In what way?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I guess what I would say is that if I would have had the means or the wherewithal to go see a psychiatrist in my late 20s, I think I probably would have landed a few diagnoses,
Yeah,
sure. I think I would have been on some meds perhaps or whatnot. I have no idea, honestly, but that's not how I chose to deal with my challenges. I was dealing with my challenges in unsustainable ways, which are familiar to a lot of people.
Sure.
And it was only at the end of that journey when I realized that just wasn't going to work. Like it was a dead end, that I needed to pick up some different tools in order to have coping mechanisms for whatever the challenges were. And I didn't realize at the time that the challenges all centered in my mind, in my relationship to my mind. And so there was a lot of things that helped me, but ultimately mindfulness feels like the biggest tool in the tool bag and that's why it's often referred to as a meta skill, right? Like a skill that helps us to acquire and perfect other skills. Because what we're doing is we're harnessing the power of awareness, right? And without awareness, where are we, right? Yeah. We're kind of just sunk, in some way.
Or spinning, more so, right? Like I think is one way, spinning out and that's another way. That's another option.
Well, we talk about this in Launchpad, right? We talk about cognitive distortions. We can talk about biases. We can talk about all these things. So I was completely prey to really dysfunctional narratives, a lot of cognitive distortions, and I was just flailing, struggling. It was really unpleasant. And so the practice of mindfulness just offers you an opportunity to shift the relationship that you have with your own mind, and to more and more come into a peaceful place with it and kind of treat it as a somewhat ridiculous roommate that you're always going to live with,
I love that. Yeah, that's great.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ready to make a real difference? Become a certified professional coach with Empower Coaching and Training. Our next CPEC cohort, accredited by the International Coaching Federation and offered in partnership with Oregon State University, starts February 28th. Spots are limited. Learn more at yesempower.com.
Well, talk to me a little bit about, so you are an ICF-PCC level
Mm-hmm.
coach.
Yeah.
And so you're working with people every day, both in a group process and in an individual process. So talk to me about how mindfulness enhances your coaching process that you use.
Mm.
And again, from a neuroscience standpoint, from a practicality standpoint, but both from your perspective and from the coaching client's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to speak to that. There's an example that has come up a few times because, some of the clients I serve are suffering from some pretty extreme circumstances, right? They're up against things that are core to their needs, you know. And so there's times when they'll be dysregulated. A bad day for some of my clients can be very intense. So I get on the phone with them and they're essentially not coachable. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
They're not in a space either in their nervous system or in their cognition. And usually those are hand in hand, right? So mindfulness for me as a coach allows me to use those tools of just noticing my breath, noticing the sensations in my chest when I get a little worried, like, oh, I don't know how to help this person, or the thoughts that start to creep up. I have an awareness of those things that are happening inside myself, and then an ability to just try and ground myself, right? So that is really helpful for me, to be someone that can regulate themselves because they've practiced mindfulness, that then another person can attune to,
Yeah.
right? So it's okay for them to show up all discombobulated, provided that I'm able to stay grounded, right? And it's interesting because I wasn't totally convinced that this was possible remotely. I thought, well, you probably need to be in physical proximity to someone, like in the space with them. But it turns out that this can happen over the phone or over Zoom. So I think one of my primary roles as a coach is to hold space for people and whatever they're bringing. And the best way that I've found to do that is to have my mindfulness practice front and center, because it allows me to be regulated. It allows me, and we know from research that mindfulness creates a lot more empathy, a lot more compassion, a lot more curiosity, all the things you need to be a good coach. So, and then furthermore, if, for example, in the case with like this client that I had the other day, it's like, okay, let's do an exercise, right? Let's focus on our breathing, or in this case, let's focus on compassion for others, compassion for self, and then let's see where we're at and what needs to happen next, right? So, and that's kind of an extreme example, I would say, as far as clients, but I think, speaking back to your previous question, mindfulness is a practice of learning how to harness awareness. And awareness is one of the hallmarks of a successful coaching process, right? So they dovetail pretty seamlessly, I find.
Yeah. Yeah. So great. It made me think of a whole bunch of things as you said that. One, I think, ICF core comps are changing a little bit and honing in. And this is one of them, is our own, how we hold ourselves as coaches.
Yeah.
And I think it's catching up with that neuroscience of understanding what you're speaking to, of if I'm doing deep breathing, if I'm reflecting on myself out loud in a session, if I'm doing these things, I'm activating the mirror neurons of the person that I'm working with, and I'm creating a connection here where we get down to grounded. And then it allows the excellence of that person to come out, because they're going into the thinking region of their brain, right? It's this whole amazing skill set that you're walking somebody through to get down to their own excellence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think that the co-regulation piece is really huge, right? But then I think the other thing I find is I'm more accepting of my I don't know, right? Like, I think a lot of times where I struggled in my early days coaching was thinking that I had to know, you know? And so if I can shift into a like, hey, let's just check in with our breathing, let's check in with, those types of things and get into a practice, it can help me to shed the idea that I need to know something rather than just being curious, right? And then that starts to reverberate with the client, right? Like, it's okay for me to be human. It's okay for you to be human. Okay, we're going to be human together. And then we're going to see what you need, right?
Yeah. So good. Yeah. I think about the gift that it brings, not just in the moment to both you and the client, or to all of you if you're using this in a group setting. But now I'm gifted with this. If I'm working with you, I'm leaving you and I'm going back to my life for the next, 7 to 14 days until we meet again. And I'm gifted with this tool of breath, or, whatever tool it is that we've practiced together in a session. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking a little bit about what we would call kind of stress reduction, right? If I come into a session with you, stress, just to put a word on it.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about, so we're talking a little bit about stress regulation. And you're starting to explain it, but just to get into a little bit more detail, can you explain the mindfulness impacts on the nervous system, or specifically our ability to downshift from fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? You're describing this in a session. How does it actually happen? What is this magical thing that occurs where my breath then just helps downshift that response? Help us out here.
Yeah. Happy to speak to that. So the idea that I like to use has to do with grizzly bears, because I'm a big fan of grizzly bears. But in this context, what I would have anyone listening to this imagine is like, okay, you're standing in the woods and then a grizzly bear comes up to you, right? Now imagine yourself being like, I think I just need to take a few deep breaths right now, right?
Right.
That's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
That's not possible.
Yeah.
You are going to be freaking out, right?
Yes.
And that's natural. Now, imagine that you got an email from someone that was threatening one of your needs, your need for acceptance and connection, your need for a roof over your head, your need for love, whatever it is, right? You feel the same as if a grizzly bear was standing in front of you, or maybe, a little less, but similar mechanics are at work.
Yeah.
But now if I ask you to take 3 deep breaths, you're actually going to be able to do that. And so what you're doing in that little micro mindfulness practice is you're sending a signal to your nervous system, right? So that mindfulness practice signals the nervous system and says like, hey, actually there's no threat here right now. We can downshift. We can move from the sympathetic, aroused nervous system that's freaking out a little bit because there's a perceived threat, to the parasympathetic, from fight, flight, freeze to rest and digest, right? So, and that's an amazingly important skill to have. I think it's a very underrated skill. I feel like it's come out a lot recently. I see it in a lot of places, which is great. But yeah, so that's essentially what's happening, right? We're sending a signal to our nervous system. Hey, I know you perceived a threat, but through breathing, I'm explaining to you that there is no threat, and we can shift back down. And like when we talk about the hand model of the brain, and how when we flip our lid, we need to be able to reintegrate, our prefrontal cortex and all that stuff. And so those mechanics are happening. We're essentially leading the way through the mindfulness practice as a response rather than a reaction. Is that making sense?
To me, it makes total sense. And what I want to underscore too, because you said it without saying it, is it's back to that relationship with your brain. It's you're compassionately, you mentioned it as like an annoying roommate, but I think about it as like how I would coach my child through this major meltdown or fear response over something that doesn't require that big of a response, and how I might coach them through breathing and comfort them, and through a sense of belonging and love and empathy, bring them down to a platform where they can actually address what is in front of them. And that's what I hear you describing, is this loving, compassionate, empathetic relationship with your brain that is wired to protect you from the grizzly bear, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's and it's the necessary first step in any process of change.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we don't have that regulation piece, it's literally impossible to start to engage the cognitive piece, which is so important, the reframing. Like, okay, what's the narrative? Like, what am I telling myself here? Is it true? Is it helpful? What do I need to do to change that? What am I choosing to believe about this? Where's the opportunity for growth? All the things that we do as coaches are only possible if we've made sure that we've downregulated in the face of some upset.
Yeah. Wow. What a superpower. It's such a superpower. So tell me what I know about working with human beings who overwhelmingly, whether it's in a professional development environment or an individual coaching, everybody wants to be living their best life.
Yeah.
And, I get I'm honored to be able to work with a lot of people on that journey. And I think the biggest barrier I run into is time. People saying, I don't have time to do this. So I think when people think about mindfulness, they think of meditation, and they think about these long sessions of meditation, like you described, right? 3 hours a day. Exactly. So how do you help clients integrate mindfulness into real lives that most of us are living, into busy lives, into modern lives where we're on most of our waking hours? How do we integrate a superpower like this into our lives right now?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ready to level up how you lead at work and at home? Empower Coaching and Training brings brain-based coaching, mindfulness tools, and real-world strategies you can share with those you serve and live with. Get started now. Visit us at yesempower.com.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I have two answers. I would say that it is totally possible to integrate into your life as it exists now. And we can talk a little bit about habit stacking, which is a term from James Clear, who wrote that book, Atomic Habits, that I think a lot of us are really fond of. I'll say I'm fond of, which is essentially the idea that if we can associate an activity with an activity that's already, like if we want to introduce a new habit, we attach it to a habit that already exists, So my habit of mindfulness and meditation is pretty much baked into my routine now. I don't have any problem skipping a day or a night or whatever. However, I have other habits that I want to establish. So if I associate those with things that are already happening, that is a really helpful signal to our monkey mind to do those things. So for example, if you drive to work, every time you get in your car, you make a deal with yourself. And it's a simple sentence, right? Like, after I open the door to my car and I sit down, I take 3 deep, intentional breaths and I look at the sky, right? And those simple micro practices built into our routine are really powerful. They add up over time, right? It's like this idea, we want to be the turtle. We don't want to be the rabbit, or, the tortoise, not the hare, depending on how you read that story.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to make those little incremental improvements. You want to make a commitment to bringing mindfulness into your life in all those small ways, rather than thinking, oh, I got to wait until I have time to go on this big retreat in Sri Lanka or whatever it is you think needs to happen. So those small things, and for folks that I coach that have issues with anxiety, I'll make sure that they do those types of practices before they going to the grocery store or going to a crowded area or whatever it is that causes them to, get into a little bit of a panic, right? So having those things integrated into our routine intentionally is a really great first step. And I also just want to say that, at least from my own experience, I have done these longer retreats. I have been on a 10-day silent retreat where it's just like, oh, I know what they're talking about now,
Yeah.
right? And so I would challenge anyone listening to this idea that we have, this narrative we have around I have the time. Like, how true is that? Right? Like, you just took a 10-day trip to Utah, right? Like, what would it be like to sit in silence for 10 days, right? And there's places that offer these types of experiences. And my thinking about this is that there are reference points available to us. A lot of people that start into a meditation or a mindfulness practice get frustrated and just stop. And they say, I'm not a great meditator, or this isn't for me. My mind is too busy. When actually that's one of the key components of starting a mindfulness practice is the realization that your mind is out of control and it's actually kind of dominating you and your behaviors and your sense of satisfaction and all of these things. So allowing yourself even a weekend retreat or even a one-day retreat in order to get into the deeper end of the pool and realize that there is a there, that there is something very profound that's available to us should we choose to explore it. I find that that can make a huge difference in people's journeys. And some people are using other means to find that kind of different experience of consciousness, and we don't need to get into that. But I think it can be helpful for people to explore ways of discovering what actually is on offer aside from feeling a little bit more calm.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
There is something else. So for the person that had literally no activity in his DMN, it's like, I don't know that he would say like, yeah, it reduces stress, right? He would say like, consciousness is profound. And, like he would just be like on cloud nine, right? And so when I say that there's no upper limit to the peace that we can experience aside from the constraints of our own schedule, what I'm inviting you and anyone listening to ponder is like, what are those actual constraints? How much of that is choice and how much of that is reality, right? And what are the trade-offs that, like if I, for example, am really struggling in my patience with my kids, right? Because I've got all this stuff going on and I've got all these quote unquote responsibilities. And yet I'm, watching the Mariners and play in the playoffs or whatever. It's like, okay, well, that also could be used to sit down for a half an hour and really just get myself centered so that I have more patience with my kids. Or, there's all these trade-offs, and I'm just putting the invitation out there for people to consider, like, what would it look like if you were to go on a weekend retreat or something along those lines? Like, how would that change your path?
Yeah.
What's the destination then versus not? So
Yeah. 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 And that, I think in that invitation, what I'm hearing is it's anywhere from, if we look for a way, I guess is what I'm hearing you have that invitation to say, what is the way? Is it, I can sit in my car, I can take three deep breaths, and I can start with that today now. And it might be for more seasoned practitioners or, those who have a bit, the ability to go away and do this, a short retreat. What am I curious about? What feelings come up as I think about that? Like if I just look for the way to begin, to deepen, if I'm in it and I'm ready to deepen, if I'm looking for the way, it's so easy to find reasons not to.
Yeah.
And I think what you're mentioning, I do that. I think about that. I teach a lot of workshops at professional development workshops. And again, talking about time, nobody has time. And then we'll take a 10-minute break and 90% of people will whip out their phone,
Yeah.
And I'm like, see, we do have time. You have 10
have
minutes
time.
right now. And and I'm guilty of that. I'm pointing the finger at these people, but I'm also pointing the finger back at myself. I do it too. It's like, I don't have time to do this. And yet I can send funny memes to people and, there is time. Am I prioritizing it? Am I telling a story that it has to look a certain way? It exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All these questions are so great.
Yeah.
And I'm as guilty of it as anyone. So,
Sure. Yeah. You talked about the other thing it made me think of is when you talked about looking for the evidence that it doesn't fit. Like, oh, my brain is too busy. I'm not good at mindfulness. I can't keep it still, which is, of course, like exactly the reason we want mindfulness, right? And it always makes me think of, I have a really great friend who's a yoga instructor, and she would always tell me, people want to know about yoga. And so she would talk about it and they would say, I can't do yoga. My muscles are too tight. And she's like, that's because you don't do yoga.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, there's a joke in the mindfulness community where it's like, I don't have 5 minutes to meditate. Well, if you don't have 5 minutes to meditate, you should probably meditate for half an hour. You know what I mean? Like, and that holds a lot of water for me, right? It's like, that's actually when we need it the most.
When we need it the most. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, again, we're kind of talking about some of these things as we go, but I just want to hone in on some of them. So we're talking about how mindfulness fits into our own lives. We're kind of are hinting around how it fits into larger societal pictures. Given how busy, crazy, wild life is currently, any moment we turn on the news, talk a bit about large-scale personal and societal dysregulation that is definitely, at least from my perspective, palpable right now, and how mindfulness can act as a way to counterbalance that trend.
Yeah. I'm super excited to speak about that because I've found it to be such a big issue just for myself and everywhere I look. And I think that's true of most folks. And, I don't think it has to do with it. We can kind of depoliticize this.
Absolutely.
And just say that there's been an experiment that has been performed on our brains. And this is a worldwide experiment. And the experiment has been, what if we create an attentional economy and we monetize that attentional economy? And we create these algorithms, and the algorithm's main goal is to increase engagement. Right? That's it. Just tell that algorithm, we want increased engagement no matter what, because the more engagement we have, the more money that we make.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, what we've realized is that the thing that creates the most engagement turns out to be rage. And so what's happening is all these algorithms that are pointed at our brains and have been pointed at the brains of our kids and all this stuff has created a way of hacking into our minds, essentially, and our nervous systems, such that we now find ourselves in a pretty crazy and unpleasant, let's say, state. That's
so
what it feels like to me.
I'm going to interrupt you and make sure I'm following. So you're saying the outcome that from the research that we are most drawn to is rage, or that is of us, we experience more rage?
Well, it's the thing that sustains engagement the most effectively.
Okay.
Right? So we used to think that.
So we're more we're clicking on things more if they are,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so I'll give you an example from my own life. So it used to be that we thought sex sells, right? So everything was about sex. Like, you remember all the advertisements in the 80s, the Farrah Fawcett's, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so fast forward to social media, and it turns out that it isn't the sex, it's the rage. It's tapping into the tribal nature of our brain and our nervous system that is sustaining engagement and creating these, you know, really, really large businesses that are, continuing to do this. So I will get on Facebook, for example, because I want to get on Facebook Marketplace because I got to sell a bike or what have you.
Right.
And what I
Gotta get a
see,
blender.
yeah, I got to get a blender. We're going to do the thing, right? Now, I get on there and there's like three little videos, one of them, two of them are maybe friends. And then there's one of someone that looks like they're about to beat up someone else. And what I can notice in myself is like I want to leap towards it,
Yeah.
right? It's the same reason that when I used to travel a lot for work and I would just like mindlessly turn on the cable TV channel. Anytime I stumbled upon an MMA match, I was just glued to it,
Yeah.
right? Because that's in my biology. And it's really affecting how we relate to each other. It's affecting our lives personally, right? Because we tend to spend more and more time on this stuff. It also turns out that we start to have what are referred to as these collective illusions. And that's also a very well documented phenomenon. I listened to this amazing podcast recently about it. But it's starting to warp us, right? And it's affecting all kinds of different aspects of our lives. So what I'm realizing is that mindfulness is one of the most important tools that I can have and that we can have in order to push the pause button when that starts to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And to start to have the conversations that we're going to need to have in order to figure out how we get out of this place of deep polarization and suspicion and anger and distrust,
Yeah.
because all the research shows that on 70-80% of all the things that we could talk about politically or otherwise, we agree. We all really want the same things.
Yes.
All of our basic needs are the same. So then how is it that we're so at odds? How is it that there's so much anger and distrust?
Yeah.
And it's been created essentially. So what are the tools that we need in order to get ourselves back to center and mindfulness, harnessing that awareness, being able to understand like, oh, I'm really activated right now. I'm really getting angry. Oh, I have a really strong belief about this person or that group or whatever the case may be. Bringing ourselves back down to a place where we can just collect ourselves and have a dialogue, right?
Yeah.
Talk to people, see what's in common, And so I think mindfulness, for me, I've realized is hugely important, and I really want to spread it as much as possible. And
Yeah.
I've really appreciated what you've done with Empower because I feel like you've done it in a way that feels really accessible and potent,
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love how you describe that. I love how you share that and bring it back to the perspective of, again, not to politicize all this, but it's, all around us right now. So to think 80%, I'm just going to grab that number, 80%, we agree on 80%, and we're being pitted. I mean, it does really feel like you could kind of easily go into conspiracy theory, but it does feel pitted. It feels like, let's put a magnifying glass on that 20% and then activate rage so we get clicks. And yeah, that's fascinating. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think the evidence is really clear on all of that stuff, and we can all feel it now, right? There were people doing the research. You got like people like Jonathan Haidt and others who have been sounding the alarm bells, especially as it relates to our kids and making sure that they're kind of sequestered from a lot of these experiments.
Right.
But then we also have AI now, right? So having awareness around how we relate to these alien intelligences is going to be a really important skill.
Yeah.
It really is going to be an important skill. So, if we think of the problem as being the same size as the opportunity, then the opportunity is for us to really give our consciousness a boost in order to meet the challenge. So
Yeah.
that has been really exciting.
Yeah, so good. And so walk us through a little bit of this. How can we do this? So you talked a little bit about stacking habits. I love that.
Hmm.
Tell
Hmm.
us, one or two specific mindfulness tools or practices that you're often introducing, not just doing to ground yourself
Yeah.
in a session, but that you're actually teaching in individual or group sessions and why you think they work so well. Why you choose those, I
Yeah.
guess I would say.
Yeah. So there are a few things that come to mind. And we're talking about specific practices that
Hmm?
I've been introducing. Yeah, just to make
Yeah.
sure I'm understanding that. Yeah. So the breath is an amazing and often, one of the first places that we start in mindfulness training is just becoming more and more familiar with the breath. The way I like to think of it is like, what if you became really good friends with your breath? What if you got to know your breath really well? You
Yeah.
know, because the breath has the key to our regulation, right? Like when we're able to regulate our breath, we're regulating our nervous system. Again, we're integrating our whole brain. We're able to
Yeah.
respond rather than react. So simple breathing practices, even if you're just starting with something like box breathing or something along those lines, but then also you can just sit with your breath as a practice, even for just a few minutes. And I'll often have clients just start there,
And when you
like,
say sit with your breath, for box breathing, we're intentionally breathing
hmm.
four, 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 four. But when you say sitting with your breath, what does that mean?
Yeah, great question. So often, if I'm, for example, leading a client on a little session in the beginning of our time together, I'll do a few intentional breaths, and that's really meant in a similar way that box breathing is meant to kind of down-regulate and get us into a calmer rest state with kind of the parasympathetic nervous system. If we do those and then just allow the breath to return to its natural state and just observe it. Really, all we're doing is just noticing where is the breath most alive,
Mm,
and as you start to pay attention, most of the time we're instructed to breathe through the nose, right? So you can start to feel the breath on the upper lip, you can feel the breath in your nose or in your throat, and you just kind of follow the breath and just notice what's happening. And the other thing that can be really beautiful about the breath is it allows us to go from doing to being. And that's a
mm,
really important thing to be able to do, right? Is like, oh, wait, I'm not breathing. The breath is breathing. Like, I don't actually have to do anything right now.
yeah.
I can just witness this process, right? And that can be really amazing for people who are constantly feeling like they have to do something, do.
Yeah.
So the breath is really powerful. I do a lot of self-compassion work with clients. Those exercises are really powerful. It's usually just as simple as thinking of someone in your life who is really easy to love, or it could even be a pet. A
Yeah.
lot of people have pets that it just brings warmth into you when you think about them. So it's really just an exercise of just closing your eyes, taking a few deep breaths, and then holding whoever or whatever that is in your mind and just offering them kindness and then having them offer you kindness. Like it's a very simple, and then at the end, you offer yourself that same kindness. So you've started to conjure that feeling of warmth and compassion, and then you aim it back at yourself. And that can be
Yeah.
like a 5 or a 10-minute practice. And that can be the start of your self-compassion journey, which, we all know is a huge tool in our resilience toolkit, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
great.
and then the last one that comes to mind is rain practice. So, we teach that in Launchpad, but, the simple idea of being able to recognize what you're experiencing emotionally, allow that to happen, investigate it, and then work on not identifying with it insofar as you realize like, oh, this is just a human experience, right? This isn't personal to me and it's not permanent. So those are some of the tools that come to mind that are kind of like a starter kit for clients and for anyone out there who's wanting to have a few different things that they can experiment with.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I know you're doing some of these things in session. What do you recommend to folks that you're working with they do between sessions? I'm thinking of, as you talked about that self-compassion, it struck me, I guess, as, there's this practice of how easily it is to say something loving to the person that I love.
Mhm.
And then I can probably imagine having them say that back to me. And
Mhm.
then there's this place that you switched it. Now I need to give myself that same love,
Mhm.
which might be a muscle that isn't very well worked. It
Yeah,
isn't
yeah, yeah.
strong. And so I'm curious, I'm imagining, we're practicing this throughout, just like we would to build our
Mhm.
muscles.
Yeah.
What do you recommend that people do in between sessions and working with you?
Practice,
Yeah.
practice, practice, practice.
Any
You know,
specific modalities do you find work better, writing or saying out
um,
loud or?
yeah, if they're able, I encourage folks to just sit quietly and engage one of these practices, even for just 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Consistency is much more important than duration, you know. Writing is a really powerful tool as well, if they're willing and able. That generally, I find for folks happens more in the kind of cognitive reframing world, more so than in the mindfulness world. I
Yeah.
think mindfulness is really like, in some ways, like a prerequisite for some of the cognitive reframing and writing exercises that clients will do.
Okay.
But yeah, I think and I appreciate what you were saying about that muscle, right? Especially as it relates to self-compassion, how people have a real barrier to aiming that compassion back towards themselves.
Yeah.
But that's why it requires practice, and that's why this kind of principle that we were talking about before, which is, oh well, the reason your muscles aren't flexible is because you don't do yoga, so you should probably do yoga. It's the same thing with self-compassion,
Yeah.
the less able you are to figure out how to be kind to yourself, the more you probably need it in order to make the types of changes that you want to make in your life, or just come into a better experience within the world that you are living in now, right?
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Well, I want to start to wrap us up because I feel like I could talk to you for days on
Mhm.
this. I'm curious as we start to just turn the corner and wrap this up. If you were to give one piece of advice to people who are hearing you and thinking, I like this, I don't even know where
Mhm.
to begin. Are there podcasts? Are there books? Are there YouTube channel? Is there any
Yeah.
place, where would I go next, I guess, or any advice that you would give me if I leave
Oh
this
man.
and go, oh, this feels big?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the first thing I would say is I really love to hold all of this stuff lightly, you know. It can feel like a self-improvement project, which in some ways it is, right? But
Mhm.
also just to kind of hold it lightly and treat it like an experimentation. Like if I do this, what happens? What's different? And bring some lightheartedness and some curiosity into the mix as best you can. With that being said, I think, well, I mean, we offer mindfulness through Empower. Like the broadcasts are really helpful, I find. Also, finding a group.
Yeah.
Most places have groups that meet on a regular basis and sit in person. And, when we were talking earlier in the conversation about co-regulation, I find that sitting with a group of people really amplifies the benefits of the practice. So it can be really helpful to kind of turbocharge your journey to find a group. As far as podcasts and books, there's so many different flavors within the mindfulness world. There's an amazing book by a guy named Robert Wright called Why Buddhism is True, and that's looking at Buddhism or mindfulness from the lens of evolutionary psychology. It kind of really starts to dig into the evidence that comes out of that field and how
Just a real light read is what that sounds like. It sounds like just...
But there's also Rick Hansen. I love Rick Hansen's YouTube channel. I mean, he addresses so much there, and he also has online practices that you can join live. Like, he'll guide you through practices and also give you a lot of the science behind things. Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there. I wish I could list everything. But yeah, I think, and then apps, I would say that's the last thing. Is I find even now, like, there's times when I'll sit without any guidance, but then I also sit with apps. I have my own. I'm not going to recommend anything specifically, but there are a lot of apps out there with guided meditations, and it can just help us to focus a little bit more, to come back to our intention throughout the practice. And then I think lastly, I would just recommend all those micro practices that we can build into our day. Try and at least a few times a day, just pause, look where your feet are, look at the sky, take a few deep breaths, those types of things.
I love that. So good. Well, Theo, thank you so much. We definitely are going to point people to a few of the mindfulness broadcasts of you specifically. We'll put those in the show notes so that people get a feel for you. We'll also put in, listeners, you heard Theo talk about Launchpad. He teaches a series of workshops we have available on demand. And then you can also get him live virtually. So we'll put the links into that. And then, of course, the ability to work with you individually as well. And Theo, thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you for what you're bringing into people's lives. It really is. It's powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for all that you do.
Thanks for tuning in to Rewired, where neuroscience meets real life change. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd be so grateful if you take a moment to leave a 5-star review. Your feedback helps people discover the tools, insights, and inspirations they need to create lasting change. While you're leaving that 5-star review, please also subscribe and share an episode with a friend. Remember, the way you think shapes the way you live. Every intentional thought, every mindful choice rewires your brain and your life. So go live intentionally, live thoughtfully, and never underestimate the power of your own mind to transform your world. Until next time, this is Tiffany with Empower Coaching and Training. Stay curious, stay empowered, and keep rewiring for real change.
Every family has challenges, and every parent deserves support. At Empower Coaching and Training, youth and parenting coach Jasmine Chandler helps parents and young people find clarity, connection, and practical tools that make a difference. Visit yesempower.com to connect with Jasmine and explore our team of incredible coaches today.